What he said, oh yeah. I was there, I saw it.
And so we're gonna go through the 4 plus.
Okay.
Other than that, you're
Yeah, I can take off, yeah.
golden, you're welcome to.
I just
But
want
you do have to be quiet when
I want to see somebody else get tortured.
Thanks. What is it, what do the actors do? Crispy, crunchy, creamy, blah, blah, blah.
How much is it showing in the camera?
Just great stuff.
Waist up, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Depends if I can't set something on, so I'm just. We're in the field.
Yeah, looks good. I'm ready whenever y'all.
Did you want
Do you
me
need
to
any
keep
audio?
my name, do all that stuff?
It's all good? Okay.
It's all good? Okay.
All right. So how did Harvey impact the community, your clients, and how were architects and their firms impacted?
Well, Harvey's impact on the local community in Corpus Christi was an interesting one because while, first and foremost, we felt like we dodged a bullet. I mean, we were really grateful and really lucky that we did not have widespread severe damage. The thing that was really nice to see was that the community got together. They pulled the resources and said, let's go help those who had more severe damage, like Aransas Pass, Rockport, Port Angeles, Ingleside. And so a lot of times you would see things on Facebook or other media that said, we're going to go do this benefit, we're going to go out there and help them out. And so you saw a lot of that, which is really nice to see. As far as other impacts, like to other firms and architects, locally we didn't see a whole lot of direct impacts. But one architect did lose his home. He was based out of Rockport. But he, and as well as others, sort of minimized that and said, we need to help others. And we have a skill set, a need to help those who don't have our skill set, don't have those resources. And so we wanted to mobilize.
So what is the building safety assessment and why is it important?
The building safety assessment is a process where you can quickly determine the safety of the building. It allows you to determine whether it's available for long-term use, just immediate use, or it's really not safe to enter. The process is basically you walk the perimeter of a building, you look at it, observe it for obvious signs of damage. If you ascertain from that exterior that it looks like it's safe to go in, then you go in and ascertain whether or not it's safe to either inhabit or just go in and get belongings, or if it's just not safe at all.
What do officials and homeowners need to know about the building safety assessment?
Well, the first thing I would say that homeowners and building officials need to know about a safety assessment, it's not let's say you get a yellow tag or a red tag, it's not a no to condemnation for the building. It doesn't mean it has to be torn down. What it's saying is it's not safe at that point in time to either inhabit or enter, and that needs either further evaluation or some remediation prior to any use of that building.
Why do you engage in this type of volunteer work?
Well, I just felt, one, extremely grateful that I wasn't personally affected by the storm, and so I wanted to share my strengths and my skill sets and my resources with others who did not fare as well, and wanted to help. I think that was something that we felt as a community, as a profession, we wanted to help others.
How did you prepare to volunteer?
I had to go get training. That was the first thing. I had to go. We went to Austin. The Texas Society of Architects quickly arranged for training to occur in Austin. So many of us drove to Austin to get that training, and then they told us, here's your manual. Here's the training that we went through, case studies, and from there they gave us a list of things that we probably need on a deployment. And you just went back and sort of waited to see where you needed to go.
So can you describe your time in the field a little bit and what might have surprised you there?
When when I went out into the Rockport area, what sort of surprised me first was how random the damage seemed to be. There are buildings that were perfectly fine next to buildings that had suffered severe damage. And I think a lot of it had to do with the age of the building, the method of construction, where that was a determining factor of how well a building fared in terms of the damage. The other thing that sort of surprised me, which was really nice to see, was just that people were very friendly, they were very open.
Can we redo this question one second?
Yeah.
What happened?
It was all your fault, Connie.
What'd you do?
There was no tape.
Oh, and sort
Conversation.
of, sort of. My memory card filled up in the middle of that last
Okay.
question.
Okay. So can I look at my notes?
So yeah, it was, the tape did run out.
It doesn't give me a heads up beforehand.
This is the next century version of the tape ran out.
So essentially, yes.
Okay, so that's,
Like that.
yeah, that was, I knew I'd forgotten something.
I know, that's
I'm
what I
gonna
was
forget a
asking.
lot.
Was it right?
I'm just not gonna.
Yeah, I'm
Was
just
that-
kind of
I'm just
gonna
gonna forget
answer
a
the
lot.
question like it was the first time I.
She said. Although I can totally rewrite my, because you have exactly the same answer I do on the question number 2. So,
What is, oh, the clients and the.
Bill, what is the building safety system?
Why is it important? Yeah.
Oh,
I
oh,
think
no, it's
she-
because she wrote that. She
So I
wrote,
didn't
I didn't
say
write,
that.
she said, don't answer that one, I'm gonna write it for you. All right.
This is a
And we're
continuation
all
of
say
the
it one
same
different way, and
question.
she's gonna clip it together.
You're gonna take the best one.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And this is the question about the time in the field.
Time in the
Yeah.
Mhm.
So just,
Yeah. Can you describe your time in the field and what surprised you?
when I was out in the field, we went to deploy to Rockport, one of the things, first things that surprised me, how random the damage was. One building would be fine, where the next one to it would suffered major damage. Some of that was due to acute location factors, might have been in front of an empty lot, which allowed the wind to impact it. Or another thing was where the age of the building, the type of construction, that was what made the difference between how well a building fared. The other thing that sort of I would say about in the field is that we weren't able to always do interior assessments, and I think that's kind of crucial and important to be able to get in the interior, because a building may look fine from the perimeter, from the outside, but you might find either mold or some other issue, but only from the inside. So that would be something I'd add to that.
What type of building component failures did you observe and what successes did you see?
The most typical building failure I observed was along the roof line. A lot of roofs, the end wall was facing the wind side. There would be a breach and it would just peel right off. And so you saw a lot of that where it was severe damage at one end and it sort of made its way to the other end. Some racking. There was some water damage. The other common thing we saw is that porches or sort of outbuildings were pulled away from the main structure. So you saw a lot of damage like that.
What do you think other architects can learn from your experience?
I think one of the biggest things we can learn from this experience is to be ready before the storm ever hits. You need to have a plan of action. How do you deploy? Because one of the things I felt so helpless for so long because I didn't have the training. We didn't have a method or procedure to get deployed. And I think that's something that's very crucial to the process.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's it.
Can we try and say that answer to the last question one more time?
Okay,
It's-
I'm trailing off.
Well, it was a little rocky.
Oh, okay.
Just try to say it. Maybe it'll flow a little bit better this time.
Okay.
I don't know what I can say about it.
I don't know what that means.
Now I gotta read this again.
Okay. Okay, can you repeat those?
Yeah. What can other architects learn from your experience?
One of the things that we think we can learn from this experience is to be ready prior to a storm ever happening. I've often felt like we were helpless for one, that we didn't have processes in place to deploy, to help, to assist, and I think those need to be in place prior to a storm.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay.
It's such good stuff, I just wanted it to be. I wanted you to nail it.
You know how to butter.
And that time you nailed it, so that was
Okay.
good.
He's standing up.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, was that it? Is it
Yeah,
torture?
that's it.
Here, go ahead and answer mine.
All right, sir.
You're just like 7 minutes long.
Nice to meet all of
Nice,
you.
you can hold it.
I wish I could just sit around and play.
Thank you, thank you.
Now
Thanks
you
very
can-
much.
now you
Okay,
can
thanks.
hold
Okay.
over.
We'll see.
Pat, now you can hold it over what you did. You got to be on film, you did, so.
He's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Get the torture over them.
When it started out, he was in San Antonio, I was here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we stayed in this building, and then we got, the first couple of days, it was just inundated. All
Everything.
of New Zealand, I mean, English calling everywhere.
All right.
On second day, we stayed, we got work. And one second, and he said, oh, I got no problem. Monday, we spent 13 hours.
Now it's a
Put a new
marathon.
memory card in there,
That's
it's
what
gonna take a while.
We're good now.
Not good taking calls, it is.
You're like, you know what? Later on, I'm sure you're gonna take off at some point and I'll have to do this still. Just, I'm gonna sit back and watch. Shut up. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Bear with me. You guys can relax for just a second.
You still have to talk, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody, yeah.
But you're
he's
going
fast.
after this, so I can read my thing again
I'm
while you're
gonna
going.
have to keep it on the lab or something. I'm not gonna remember how I answered these questions.
But actually, I think she's right, when you don't wanna look at it, you don't
Yeah.
wanna think about it.
Just say whatever
Yeah,
you're
just
gonna
like you
say.
did on the telephone conversation, just,
Yeah, but then I'll go off on a different tangent.
well, that's okay.
That's what he edits for.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then she's gonna go, well, wait a minute. But then, I'm just trying.
What they're probably gonna do with question number 2 is have you do part of it and I do part of it.
Or take, which contest you want to get
Yes.
this at. It's all yours. Should I just get one of them?
No.
No.
Notice there are
That's
several
not really,
questions,
no,
Lindsay,
hold it.
on everybody's.
Yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
Dude, the list, well,
Are you all ready?
Yep.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, we can start whenever. You don't have to
Need
start
the
this second.
prompter.
Yeah,
But yeah.
yeah, for all of those.
yeah, I could.
All right. Can you describe the mission and work of the Disaster Assistance Committee?
The American Institute of Architects Disaster Assistance Program trains architects to utilize their skills to help those that are affected by and to prepare for disasters. The Disaster Assistance Program is based on the California Office of Emergency Services Safety Assessment Program.
What is the Safety Assessment Program?
In 2008, the American Institute of Architects adopted and adapted the California Office of Emergency Services Safety Assessment Program to help prepare the membership and better enable them to assist in the event of a disaster.
What is a building safety assessment and why is it important?
Building safety assessment is a process of which buildings are quickly evaluated to determine their use, whether it's immediate use, conditional use, or disuse. The safety assessment, also referred to as a rapid assessment, is a process that takes 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes longer depending on accessibility to the interior of the building. And as a part of this is whether or not the building can be safely used, and if so, it reduces the demand for temporary housing or other services provided by the community.
Why do architects participate in these assessments? Who else is involved and what is the process like?
I've been asked before why architects, but in my mind it's who better than an architect. Architects know how buildings go together. Every day we work on designs that not only look at the design of the structure, but it incorporates many other systems. The architect also leads the team and brings together all the talents on the project and gets them all going in the same direction. Architect also is typically the point person with the building permit department or the authority having jurisdiction. And this, I think, ideally suits the architect to participate in the rapid assessments.
What's the process like in this list we're talking about having the SAP ID card and the hard hat and all that stuff? Can you kind of go into?
Ideally, the architects will be requested to deploy from the authority having jurisdiction. And the first step is that when the call goes out to the architects that are trained evaluators through the Cal OES SAP program to come up to the staging area to get their instructions. They meet with the coordinator. They're given a briefing of where they're going. They're deputized if that is a component of the assessment. And then they're deployed from that location out to do assessments. They'll do assessments during the day, and at the end of the day, they'll report back to the area and turn in information that they have based on the estimates that were performed that day.
What value do architects bring to the program?
Again, I think architects, it makes sense that the architects need to be involved through our training practice, and in beginning with our education. We again know how buildings go together and are able to assist our communities in providing this service.
When are safety assessments typically conducted? And describe the process of conducting a building safety assessment.
Architects providing safety assessments are not first responders. In essence, we're second responders. Once the area is deemed safe and the power and the search and rescue has been completed, the architects can be deployed. The process begins with an evaluation of the structure from the exterior. We walk the perimeter of the building to see if we can identify any hazards. And they could be, for example, scouring, damage to the site, chemical spill of some unknown source. Once that's completed, and if it's deemed that it is safe, then the evaluator can go into the structure and do an evaluation of the interior of the structure. And this can identify other hazards or issues that would possibly preclude the use of that building or may limit the use of that building.
Can you describe the three-card system, green, yellow, red, and what each of those mean?
The California Office of Emergency Services Safety Assessment Program and the Applied Technology Council have a three-placard system, red, yellow, and green. The green placard identifies that the structure, whether it's a residence or small business, has been inspected and that no hazards have been identified that would preclude the use of that building. Not saying there's no damage. There may still be damage and repairs may be necessary, but it is safe to continue its use and even stay in. As an aside, the authority having jurisdiction identifies the habitability of a structure, which the three major components are protection from the elements, access to potable water, and access to sanitary sewer. A green placard would indicate that the structure is habitable. The yellow placard is a conditional use identification. It would be, there may be some damage that would need to be addressed, be taken care of. There may be a portion of the structure that cannot be used. And this would all clearly be identified on the placard that's posted on the structure. Oftentimes, a yellow placard would signify that the house is not safe to inhabit, but that it would be safe to enter to retrieve possessions, either personal belongings or in a business instance, computers and records. The red placard is an obvious unsafe structure. It could be in imminent danger of collapse, could have structural failures, could have a chemical spill, could have other issues, and it is not safe to go into for any reason. This three-placard system, once the evaluation is completed, the placard's identified, it's affixed to the front of the house, and this notifies the owner, and any tenants or any users of that building what the evaluation is identified for that building.
Can you real quick define the red flag, the red one again, right at the very end? We just had the phone ring, so just,
That's me.
The red placard identifies an obviously unsafe structure. It could be in imminent danger of collapse. There could be structural failures, could be chemical spills of an unknown source, or other issues that make it safe not to enter into for any reason. These 3 placards are then affixed to the structure to notify the owner, any tenants or residents or users of the building what the evaluation has determined.
Can you talk a little bit also about the form that's filled out before you put the placard on the building?
ATC, the Applied Technology Council, in conjunction with their ATC 45 and ATC 20-1, provide rapid assessment evaluation forms as well as detailed assessment evaluation forms. This is a form that identifies the structure by address, owner's name if that's available, and contact information. It also identifies what the evaluator sees on site as far as the extent of the damage, if there is any. It is filled out to, once it's completed, it's returned to the authority having jurisdiction or the building committee for their use. But it identifies the extent of the damage, the location of the damage, the size of the building, square footage, number of floors, number of units, and the primary use of that facility, whether it's a dwelling or a business occupancy.
Okay, I think that was all in that chunk of question. Moving on to the next question. Why did you personally decide to engage in this type of volunteer work?
A lot of people in my family are in law enforcement, and we were raised that if somebody's in need and you're in a position to help, that you need to do so. My involvement with the safety assessment program began with Hurricane Katrina. When I saw the magnitude of the storm, I knew that I had to do something. Being able to provide safety assessments was a service I could provide that not everyone could, and I was qualified to do so because I'm an architect.
Can you describe your time in the field and what you've learned?
When I first deployed to the Mississippi Gulf Coast following Hurricane Katrina, one of the first things I noticed was the homeowners and building owners that we met with all wanted to tell their story. They wanted to tell you what happened to them, what they went through, and what they saw. I think that's part of the healing process, is to be able to go through what happened to you. Another thing I noticed was the people were very outgoing, very friendly, and very appreciative that we were doing the safety assessments. For the most part, they were dealing with insurance adjusters that were greatly overworked, and we were able to explain to them things that they did not quite understand from their insurance adjusters. And I guess the last thing would probably be I didn't realize the magnitude of the disaster. When I returned home from one trip, my wife asked me what it looked like, and I told her it looked just like you see on the news, except it goes on for 90 miles. You don't really get that perspective from TV or newspaper photographs.
Why do architects provide these services as volunteers?
The American Institute of Architects Code of Conduct and Ethics, I believe it's canon number 2, states the architect should provide for the community in both their public and private lives, and this gives them that opportunity to do so. Also, by our own licensure from the individual states, we're obligated to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and this is a way of doing that as well.
Anything else you want to add?
Good night, no. I forgot half of what I wrote.
Memorize that whole? That's
No.
impressive.
Yeah, it
No,
was
it
very
sounds like,
right on with some of the, except for the big diagram.
What do you
about-
call the, where do you go when you start a deployment? What do you call
Deploy? What do you mean?
EOC.
Oh, the Emergency Operations Center?
Operations Center.
there's another, there's a more of a common name for where you, the starting points, the gathering spot, what do you call that?
You're talking about a command?
Yeah.
Command post?
Command post.
Maybe,
I mean,
maybe
military BACP, or it's gonna be the,
I drew a complete blank, we all go to the,
I'd did
Starting line?
EOC.
edit that out for me.
I've got to at least look down at what my answers were.
No, just supposed to be looking down.
Oh, I keep, no, not to say it, no, just look at it and go, okay. And remember what the heck I was talking about. Because, or if I forget, would you mind just handing it to me? That'll work just fine. Because, I mean, it's.
You're gonna be fine.
I want to be just fine. I'm
You
just
talk
trying
all the time.
That's the problem. I can keep going about other things. See, you've already known me well enough.
I'm used to walking around when I'm presenting, so I'm not used to sitting in a chair with.
I don't sit in a chair and talk either. Gosh almighty. Okay, I'm gonna have to look at it occasionally.
All right.
I can't sit like you did. There's no way.
We're not quite ready to start. I need
Good.
to adjust this stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, because I'm gonna have to look at it. I honestly. I don't need word for word. I just gotta remember the points in my head that I was trying to make. See, I've already forgotten the first question.
How can you read that from there?
I can't. I read the question. Oh, the question? I had LASIK. Best $6,000 I've ever spent in my life. That was 11 years ago. I probably shouldn't slouch either. Tell me there's a boner or something, that's just gonna be wrong. I did shave. That's unusual. I'll go all the way to Friday. It's an advantage of owning your own firm.
Yes.
People are used to it. No, it's Friday. You just got a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 project.
Don't look at the light.
Thank you. That's what.
What, like?
You know when he says,
Is
don't
it-
look
am I-
over
am I
here?
get- You know, I on purpose didn't cut my hair again. Keep the shine off of it.
You notice when he says, don't look over here?
I'll have
We
to
all-
work
We
on
all
my-
look where he says, don't
I
look.
have to work on my phrasing on that. That's really bad. Don't look at this light. Huh?
Well, I was looking at what you were doing, and then it's like,
Phrasing.
don't look at the light. I'm not that much taller or anything, am I? What did I screw up by? Sitting strange. Yeah, I have my
Oh, yeah.
hands up, talking kind of deal, and
Stand behind the podium.
and I'm gonna be like this, and the whole thing again. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
You ready?
Yeah, whenever you guys are ready to begin, go ahead.
How did Harvey impact the Texas community, and how were the architects and their firms impacted?
Well, Harvey impacted the entire, Texas architectural community. Texas is so big that it affects different parts of the states in totally different ways. In my area, in the central Texas, not all that much in terms that we had some rain, but yet I had clients with facilities across the state that were having to move their residents to other portions of the state. I had areas very close to home that were not impacted by winds, but were flooded out due just to high rainfall amounts. And so I had clients and projects that were delayed significantly. And so we could feel the effects even being 150, 200 miles from directly where it hit, just because Texas is a large state, but everybody seems to know each other.
What is a building safety assessment, and why is it important?
Building safety assessment is a process by which we quickly go around and evaluate a structure or building, homes or businesses, to determine safety for occupancy or for entry at all. And it's a quick evaluation around the outside to determine whether it's still structurally sound before even going underneath or inside the facility. Then, if possible, going inside to determine any structural damage or any large-scale damage. And this is to determine whether or not it's safe to enter, whether or not it is not necessarily habitable, because a lot of buildings can be habitable once corrected, but in this case, when the safety assessment is done, it's just to determine, is it safe physically for people to go into? And that process allows for homeowners, business owners, to know whether or not they can go into that building. It also gives the agencies having jurisdiction, those who ask for the assessors to come in, to determine general amounts of damage throughout their county, city, or whatever the jurisdiction is.
What do officials and homeowners need to know about a safety assessment?
And there's two really. The homeowners are a very big difference than the officials. But homeowners really need to understand. They get confused by the placards sometimes. People are there's a lot of people out after a disaster like a hurricane. These are also used on wildfires and earthquakes and all sorts of other disasters. There's a lot of people that show up. There's a lot of adjusters. There's a lot of insurance people. There are people from FEMA. There's contractors they've never seen before in their life, and they're showing up. And there's a lot of people that get a little bit of a mistrust sometimes. And we as professionals are there to help ease that. And so homeowners need to understand, why is it a green? Why is it a red? What does a yellow mean? And just helping them understand, giving them that comfort level that a professional has looked at it. This building it's safe enough for you to go in and get your stuff, if it's a yellow placard or an unsafe or restricted building, but stay away from this particular area. Don't go on the porch, it's not safe. Or don't go there at all. I personally, if it's a red, and we got this enough that people go, okay, it's a red placard, does that mean I can't go in? I've been in there for 3 days cleaning my stuff out. And the answer is, I as a professional don't think this building is safe for anyone, including a contractor, to go into. That's up to you. Still, it's your home. You do as you see fit, but as a professional, I've told you that it's not. For building officials, it's a different story. They want to know total damage. They need to know there are groups and agencies way above them that are asking for their numbers. What is the damage like? How much is it going to cost? What is the total damage? What's the kind of damage? Where is the damage at? Building officials and cities and counties, this is invaluable information that they can use not only to allow for money to flow in from state and federal sources, but also for post-planning, for recovery efforts. They can see where the worst damage was and see, well, what can we change about zoning? What can we change about building codes, or just about when we rebuild, what areas do we need to focus on more?
Why did you engage in this type of volunteer work?
I engaged in this volunteer. I had to. When I saw what was going on in first coming in, I've lived through hurricanes living in Florida, and previously I've been through hurricanes myself. I've seen the damage, and I knew how much people were going to need help. As a licensed professional, I knew there was something I can do. I'm also a former state guardsman. I volunteered or was deployed for wildfire disasters here in Texas. I knew there was something I could do. I just didn't know how, and I knew that there was a moral obligation I had. I wasn't sleeping well because I had to get out there. I was ready to buy a boat and go to Houston and start, but that's not what I do. That's not what my strengths were. So I knew there had to be something out there that I could do about it, and it's a moral obligation. And we talk about health, safety, and welfare. Every architect has to take continuing education units. You got your CEUs you got to go for, and it says HSW after for a reason. Your oath and your license is health, safety, and welfare. Well, that's first. The design stuff comes second. And after you've been in a hurricane or you've seen the destruction, you realize that is the first thing that you should be thinking about when it comes to it. And so I knew I had to get out there.
So how did you prepare to volunteer?
My preparation for volunteering was bugging them, how can I get out there, how can I get out there, how can I get out there? Actually, what I really did, I got on and I started downloading information. I got onto the ATC, Applied Technology Council's website. I downloaded the whole training program. I downloaded the placards, the forms. I started reading well before I even took the training. So by the time I took the training, and this was actually only days before I took the training, I was ready. I had already read through it. I knew what the form said. I knew what the slides were going to be when I saw them, and it only helped it that much more. I'd also already made lodging arrangements, and I was ready to go take off the next morning from training. I was ready.
Can you describe your time in the field and what surprised you?
I was surprised by the extent of the damage, not the severity of it. I've been through hurricanes before personally. I'd lost power, I'd had damage to my own homes in Florida. And so I knew what hurricane damage looked like. I had never seen the extent of damage. It was just day after day after day. I spent additional time in the field doing recon work for getting some stuff going ahead of time for coordinators to be able to get volunteers out. That allowed me to see more and more and more of the damage. I'd seen tornado damage, I'd seen that. It's the extent of the damage is the part that really took me by surprise.
What type of building component failures did you observe while in the field, or successes?
Building component, failures and successes, I couldn't help but notice them while I did the assessments. I took pictures because I'm an architect. I also teach classes. I do training seminars. I wanted to know, well, okay, the roof failed. I saw that a lot. That was one of the things that you see all the time and most of. And the walls also failed. The foundation is the only thing left. The whole building's done. The roof generally was the one I saw the most, but I also wanted to know why. And so I looked really closely. I took a lot of pictures personally outside of doing assessments. When you're doing the assessments, you're very focused on that specific building and structure. But outside of it, I noticed no hurricane clips tying rafters to bearing walls. I noticed no particular line of structural strength from the roof down to the foundation. I saw entire buildings lifted off their foundation because the sill plate was held down with a single 2-inch washer over a 20-foot length. Well, it just pulled the entire wall right off the foundation. It was those kind of failures that honestly I expected to see. But I also saw a lot of buildings, and they were often across from each other, where the entire structure was gone across the street, but the one I'm standing next to looked like it was in a different county during the hurricane. But it was built in probably the last 10 years and met the current building standards, current windstorm standards. And so and they had done everything they needed to do. And not a shingle was missing because they'd done the construction that they needed to be done.
What can other architects learn from your experience?
What other architects I think really can learn from this experience is keeping an eye of not just the building they're working on, and I'm guilty of doing this myself as an architect, of focusing on my site. And what they found is it's all the stuff around the site that is an incredible impact. I've seen entire buildings wiped out from the building next to them. They could have been built correctly, but they were built next to one that's 30, 40 years older. I've also seen buildings that took hits from damage from flying debris. Buildings in an RV park that were built fine, but all the RVs around it became flying debris and smacked right into it. So the environment around each structure, each building is incredibly important. What I think other architects can really take away from at least my experience in the field, it gives you an appreciation like you've never seen for humanity, honestly. There's always bad parts to it. It is extremely, it's heart-wrenching sometimes to see the damage, to watch a child and her mom sift through their clothes in a house that is totally gutted, or the drywall is on top of everything they're trying to get out. And it's utterly heart-wrenching, especially if you're out for days or weeks on end. And there's a reason why you try not to deploy too long. But I also saw those same people offering me water and food while I'm inspecting their house, and they are so thankful to see me do it. It only made me want to be better. It makes me want to, I've always been a code geek. I've always loved doing it. You can't get me to change my mind now, because I know what it does. I know what following the rules, following the codes do, and what improving them could mean. And so in terms of what other architects can really learn from me and my time in the field, I hope that they just take it as, I want to get out there and help. Is that it?
Thank you. That was
Okay,
it.
I think I remembered actually most of it. So you're right, you just stole it. I know I missed stuff, but I added stuff in, so. Okay.
Good.
Which you're up.
Last one, yay.
I did an assessment for a lady in Gulfport. She and her husband lost the house, and they were in a FEMA trailer. And her husband had a stroke. And then she took the night shift at the hospital on medical records, and a son moved back home to stay with his dad at night, and somebody stole her car at work. Man, I felt like I wanted to buy the lady a car or something.
Oh,
I felt so bad for her.
I know, I mean,
God, how much more can she take?
but that's also what I was amazed that people just, you just felt like you keep getting hit,
Yeah.
hit. And then you're walking by and you're doing this, and they're shaking your hand and thanking you for doing this, and offering you what I'm going, I'm here to help.
She
Hi.
said, you said she was a nurse? Or
No,
what
she
did
worked
you
in
say?
medical records, but she worked at the local hospital.
Somebody stole a car out of a hospital parking
Parking
lot.
lot. You gotta
That-
be, you gotta
that
be
should-
pretty much a crumb.
In Texas, I think that's a death row thing. That should be a case.
Because no matter who's there, like you're either helping people or you're there because you're sick or
Sick.
somebody you know is
Somebody's
Or
gonna
sick.
family
And-
sick, or, yeah.
Well, but people
You're
that
gonna
steal
steal a
cars like
car?
that don't think like this. I'll never understand the criminal mind. It's a good thing I'm not involved in that.
Do you want your questions, or do you want somebody else's questions? Just-
I fit Texas really well. I fit into Texas criminal justice system really well. For being liberal, I don't have a liberal.
What kind of carburetor goes on the 68 Mustang?
Oh, yeah. Don't build in the floodplain.
Ron White has his, where other states are abolishing the death penalty, Texas is putting the express line.
Are you ready?
Yep, I'm
You
ready.
ready?
Of course.
Why did you engage in disaster systems work?
So I engage in this type of work in disaster recovery because I was in architecture school when Hurricane Katrina hit, and that was really the first time I considered the impact that a design professional can have in the built environment and in helping communities be better and make safer places for people to live. So after a disaster, the social and environmental vulnerabilities in a community are very clear, and I am interested in being able to see what those vulnerabilities are and making the community better than it was before.
How did you prepare to provide building safety assessments?
So the first thing you do to prepare for your building safety assessment is to take the training. There's a safety assessment program training that you go through. That training provides all the information about the process and the details you need to know before you deploy. So I attended that training in Houston, provided by the American Institute of Architects Houston chapter.
Can you describe your time in the field and what, if anything, surprised you?
So I was deployed after Hurricane Harvey about 3 or 4 weeks after in Orange County, which is an area that experienced more flood damage than wind damage. So my experience in the field was just seeing so much debris on the side of the road. Everywhere you went, people were pulling drywall and furniture and appliances out of their house. So it doesn't really matter if you had 1 inch or 10 feet of water, things are ruined for the most part. What was the other part of the question?
What surprised you?
What surprised me? So I was there, I was surprised when I was in Orange County 4 weeks after Hurricane Harvey, and I already saw people putting their lives back together. I already saw people that had pulled out everything from inside of their house and were sitting there with a tractor trailer full of insulation and drywall ready to get back in. So I was surprised to see people getting things back together so quickly, and it just made it very apparent that we need to be prepared to be out there immediately after the first responders are, because these decisions are going to be made very quickly by people who are deciding to come back or leave, rebuild or not, and if we aren't there to help them make a sound judgment about the safety of their building to go in and perhaps even to rebuild or not, then those decisions will be made without us and maybe not in the best way.
What type of building component failures did you observe?
In the areas that I was deployed in, most of the houses were in the 100-year floodplain, which means that they are at a higher risk for flooding. And even though they were marked for this higher risk, hardly any of them were elevated at all. And they were built out of materials that were more difficult to dry out after a flood event. So the thing that I would say to architects building in these areas or communities that are building housing in more vulnerable areas is that you need to build to that vulnerability and elevate the homes or build them out of materials that are easy to replace or dry out after a flood event, because it will likely happen.
What can other architects learn from your experience?
Other architects can learn from Hurricane Harvey to build to your site's vulnerability and to put people at as little risk as possible, obviously, and build homes in a way that can withstand a moderate amount of wind and flood events. I don't know, it's a stupid answer.
What was the process that AIA Texas used to respond?
So the Texas Society of Architects, which is the state chapter of the American Institute of Architects, has been working to build relationships between the state and the local communities so that we can start building that network of local leaders and architects who were better able to match up our very skilled volunteer force with the needs on the ground.
Who were the collaborators and partners with AIA Texas?
So the Texas Society of Architects is working with the Building Officials Association of Texas and other professional organizations that we would engage with in our daily practice, like planners, engineers, building officials. We're working with those same professionals here in disaster recovery because we're all part of this community network of creating a safe and healthy built environment.
What can other component and member leaders learn from your experience?
Other American Institute of Architects chapters and community leaders can learn from this experience that it's important to be prepared year-round. That if you're training volunteers and getting your ducks in a row even the day after the disaster, it's almost too late. That you really need to have a skilled and ready volunteer force on the go at any time, and you need to have the relationships in place between the state and the local communities to be able to know where the greatest need is and how you can get people there.
That was good.
That was good. I don't think any of the stuff that was on that paper.
It was a lot of, it was a lot of
Sounded
stuff.
good.
See if you missed it. Nah,
You did really good about repeating the questions. I don't think I did that.
I think I did a little bit, but not as, she did it really
Yeah,
well.
she was
You did
Remember not
every-
to use acronyms.
I did try to repeat a few things, but
And it
not,
says
not the questions
on
like.
here. I'm not making that up.
Oh, I know,
You
yeah.
corrected me, and I was like, that's right. Said it again.
I don't really understand. Do other state chapters have like a different name like that? Because
Honestly,
honestly,
Boston Society.
there is.
Yeah, they do call them various different.
Before,
But most,
like, my
you know,
company had this,
They call
before
it-
my
Yeah,
nonprofit had
yeah,
this
in
contract, I
Mississippi,
didn't even know the
yeah,
Texas
before.
Society of Architects was part of the AIA. Like,
And I think Florida's got like 13
Yeah, it
chapters.
says it's like under.
Yeah,
maybe it
Tampa,
has a
yeah,
type of-
Miami, but-
So is there any other interview
Yeah.
stuff we need to have done?
But yeah, they're.
What?
That's it, right?
I think
yeah,
that's
that's
it.
it.
Is that all of them?
Mhm.
Yes, that's. Because it would just be 7 of.
Yeah, I mean, I've counted 7, I just want to make sure.
Well, no, because you got the 4 of us, and then you got Pat and.
And Debbie, and Kevin,
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Kevin.
Yeah,
That's
Exactly,
seven.
that's 7.
yeah.
Okay.
What time is it?
It's 2:30.
I'm from Mississippi, so I talk slow, but they don't.
I have never talked slow, and I'm not.
I
original
probably
from
learned
Texas.
that.
Yeah, I probably.
I am not on the intersection by any means.